Hello, everyone. This is Nicholas Capman, and welcome to the Passionate Workforce podcast. I am the author of The Passionate Workforce, How to Create and Maintain Maximum Employee Engagement, which is an Amazon #1 bestseller. So if you haven't picked up a copy, please do. On the podcast, joining me today is Jill Omalan. Hi, Jill. How are you?
Hi, Nicholas. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you.
Um,
Thank you for inviting me. Very
Yes,
excited to be here.
especially considering that it's nighttime where you're located and you're going through a snowstorm. So
Exactly.
re
Yes.
really appreciate you attending this podcast. So before we get into today's topic, would you please introduce yourself?
Will do. Perfect. Thank you. So as Nicholas mentioned, my name is Jill O'Malan. I am originally from Ireland, but I'm based in the UK. I work in the pharmaceutical industry. I've been in that industry now for 23 years and always within quality assurance. Lots of different companies. My first role was at Shearing Plough. I worked at small biotechs. I was at Genzyme for a number of years. I was at Baxter Healthcare, Lonza Biologics, and for the last 9 years, I just had my 9 year anniversary last year. I've been with
Congratulations.
Astellas. For those of you who don't know, Astellas is a Japanese company, but I'm based at their UK office just outside London.
Okay,
And
excellent.
very high level, that's me.
That's perfect. So before we get into the problem statement, I believe you have a disclaimer that you wanted to
I
say?
do. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you for
Y-
the reminder.
You're welcome.
So as I mentioned, I am a paid employee at Astellas. So for today, this discussion is intended for informational purposes and does not replace any independent professional judgment. The discussion is not intended to provide any medical or legal advice. Statements of fact or positions taken and opinions expressed are those of myself as an individual, and unless I expressly state to the contrary, do not necessarily reflect the opinion or position of my employer, Astellas, or that of any of its subsidiaries or related legal entities. So
Okay,
thank you
great.
for giving me the time to do
Absolutely. Okay, so now that we're done the fun stuff,
that.
um, what are we going to be talking about today?
So today I think we're very much going to talk about people development and how we use that to ensure that we have an engaged and very motivated workforce, but also looking at your organizational health and how it helps to support that.
Okay, great. So why don't we start very high level? Can you please
Mhm.
define people development?
That is actually a very good question. And that I will say has been something I have seen in conversations with people that there's a lot of confusion on. Um, so I think as a people leader at various levels within organizations, when you start having development conversations with people, there's often a confusion on what that means. And sometimes I think the misunderstanding comes from they think that means promotion. And that's not necessarily always the case. So for me, development means the acquiring of new skills and experiences. Those can be technical or they can be soft skills or, communication skills, time management skills, leadership skills. Um, and having those development opportunities and gaining those new skills and experiences can down the line lead to advancement or promotion. But for me, development is very much about, having that growth mindset and helping your people to acquire those new skills and experiences. And generally, I think the experiences is always the key focus, that hands-on experience rather than maybe education or courses. But for me, at a very, very high level, that is what development means.
Okay, great. Now, my next question might seem obvious, but I think once we actually take what we're feeling and thinking and put it into words, it
Yeah.
can kind of transform slightly. So, why is it important to develop your people?
So I think there's a number of reasons for it. I mean, I think fundamentally it's the right thing to do. Um,
So a moral and ethical.
Number one, I think it is.
Okay.
Yes. We hire, especially in my industry, pharmaceuticals, we hire highly educated, very smart, and very intelligent people. They need to be challenged and they like to learn. And that in turn stimulates them, it motivates them, it keeps them engaged. So there's that side of it, the employee engagement and motivation side. There's also the other side that the world is changing very, very quickly. New technologies, the pandemic, remote working, hybrid working, all the AI, Gen AI. So we have to adapt and we have to keep learning. If we don't do that, we're not going to succeed as an organization or as a business. So we have to train and develop our people in order to meet the expectations for now, but also for the future.
Okay. So
Uh,
there's a moral and ethical component, and also if I'm going to paraphrase, it's to keep your people up to date on best practices so that they don't lag. Is that
yeah.
correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah, I would say that. And
All
then I would
right.
say the third part is, I'm not going to be around forever. My
Mhm.
peers aren't going to be around forever. And we have to prepare our people to take over my role, the other LT leadership team members' positions. And we need to prepare the organization for the future. And that's, whether they stay within the company you're in or they move elsewhere. I think there's an imperative on you as a leader to get people ready to take over that in the future, whether it's now or in 5 years or 10 years. I think that's really, really fundamental and core part of my responsibility as a people leader is getting people ready for the future.
Yep. So then succession would be another element of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing that I would add to the discussion is I think it is a good retention tactic.
Yes.
Because when people feel, many people, when they feel unstimulated and stagnant,
Yeah.
I think they start to explore other opportunities. So I think there is
Really
an
good point.
element of retention.
Yeah.
Now, outside of that, there's been discussion, well, if I develop my people, they're going to get really good at what they do and then they're going to leave me. That's a fear that I think
Yeah.
is sometimes had by certain individuals.
Yeah.
Really, the question comes down to a couple things. One is, do you want to keep your employees at a certain level of education, not to exceed that, in which case you're actually hurting your company because you're not able to develop that workforce into something that can produce more creative, innovative, and productive
Yeah.
things. The other thing is, I think by not developing your company, we just talked about the fact that you actually might even hurt your retention
Yeah.
capability.
Yeah.
So I would argue for anybody that isn't subscribed to the ideology of people development that it does help with retention, it helps the organization. And at the end of the day, we as leaders and managers are responsible for creating an environment whereby it is difficult for our employees to leave because it's just so good, whether
So
it's
good.
right. It's the management, it's the leadership, it's
Yeah.
the pay, everything that comes along with retention
Yeah.
is really our responsibility. So I think we can educate at the same time as making sure that we're creating a work environment whereby they wouldn't want to see if the grass is greener on the other side.
Yes, exactly. And I hear that argument, or I have heard it in the past as well. We invest all of this and then they go and leave.
Mhm.
But honestly, if you're not going to invest in them in the first place, you're not going to keep them anyway.
Right, right.
Yeah,
And I think that's my perspective. I would agree
yeah,
with that. Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
So, people development, what has been your strategy for tackling this?
Yeah, and it's developed over the years. And I just be completely honest as well. I mean, this isn't always something I've come up with. It's always been done in partnership with other leaders within the organization and often with HR as well. I have to say I've been very lucky in my career to have had great HR business partners. who've helped a lot with this. But I think for me, I think there's a number of elements to it that you have to go through. And I think you also have to do it consistently and fairly and regularly. Like it's not a one-off thing. It is something that has to be done on an ongoing basis. So I think what I've seen work well is for a starting point was developing something called a competency model. And just to explain a little bit what that is, or what we've done in the past is so for every role in your organization, from your most junior role up to your most senior, what are the skill set that you need for those roles? And that's both the technical skill set and the knowledge, but also, the competencies, the leadership skills, the communication skills. And at what level do you need those skills and competencies? Is it kind of very basic? And then, as you go up through the organization, maybe progressing to proficient to advanced. And that then forms almost a pathway. So you start at this, but you can clearly see what skills you need at the next level and what you need to develop in order to go to that. But also to move sideways. It's not always about going up. And these days, I think more and more people will take sideways moves into other areas. So I think it's having that framework to start with so that you're very clear. And it's also very transparent to your team members on what the expectations are for each level within your organization. So I think that's the first thing, putting that in place. And then that can also form the foundation of things like job descriptions, and also helps with when you are hiring for a role, what is the skill set and the competencies that you need to hire to. So I think that's the first thing I and others have tried to put in place as kind of the foundation for, I guess, our development program and how we manage talent. And then I guess that's the second part of it is regularly doing talent management reviews and succession planning. Again, I don't think that should be a one-off. I think it certainly should be done something probably on an annual basis, maybe even a bit more frequently. And again, with talent management review, I think, there are different approaches that can be taken. I mean, obviously you're going to look at all your people and, how are they performing? But when you look at performance, you're looking at how are they performing in their current roles, which is an indicator and gives you a certain amount of knowledge. But you also really want to look at what is their capability to move into other roles. And for me, the big focus in certainly the last 10 years, I would say, in talent management reviews has been on people with leadership capability, and identifying those individuals in an organization. I think it's very well understood that just because somebody is a great individual contributor and technically very skilled, that does not necessarily mean they will make a great leader. So it's really trying to give people opportunities to maybe lead a small project team or lead a small group or contractors, giving them opportunities to shadow, maybe do secondments and test them, give them stretch projects and see what their capability is. And then in those talent management reviews, having those discussions to identify the people who are your potential leaders for the future.
Yeah.
And then I think what's key as well is identifying where maybe they have gaps or need development. And then that again should feed into things like development plans and development discussions. So I think those are probably some of the key elements of what I've done in the past. Other key elements I would say is mentoring.
Oh,
Sorry.
so I'm going to pause you there because there's something I want to address. So, to your point, contributors aren't always the best leaders, and I think for anybody that pays attention to athletics, pick your favorite sport. We've
Yeah.
seen many really good on the field athletes that make an attempt to go into coaching and it doesn't work. So that's for sure. The other thing I wanted to mention is not everybody, not only is not everyone ready for leadership, but not
Mhm.
everyone is looking for leadership. And so I kind of look at people in two different capacities. I call them rock stars and superstars.
Yeah,
So a rock star, and this is borrowed from other readings. So again, not my original idea, but a rock star is somebody that's really good at their job and their function, and they're
yeah,
happy being there, and they want to develop
yeah,
within that role.
yeah,
Superstars are people that are ambitious about climbing the corporate ladder and they want to kind of develop and reach those different levels as they proceed through their career journey.
yeah.
So I think one thing that's important is making sure that
Mm.
we don't assume everybody wants what we want, right?
Yes.
People want different things. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, no, no, no. And it's a really, really good point. And I may use that rock star, superstar, if you
Feel
don't
free.
mind, in the future, because I really like that. But I think that's why those development conversations are so important because, we can do our talent management reviews and say, oh, this person can definitely see they have amazing leadership capability and we should make that happen. But you're right. And it has happened to me. I've gone and spoken to people and they're just like, I don't really want to manage people. I don't want to lead. I'm happy doing what I'm doing.
Hmm.
Or also, I've had people who are in a leadership role, but they don't want to go further. They're
Hmm.
happy doing what they're doing. Um, and I think the key message I have always tried to give my team is it's your career and it's your development. It's not mine. So you have to decide what you want. And that can be progressing up the organization. It can be moving sideways. It can be staying and doing what you're doing. That doesn't mean that you can't learn new skills, and have new experiences. It's a different conversation. But it is their career. So I can't tell them what they should be doing. That they
Right.
need to decide that. And then it's my job to help support it.
Well, and here's another thing, just to make our jobs even easier, is it's always changing.
Yes.
So somebody that may not have wanted to advance now does want to advance and vice versa. So I think it's a requirement of us as leaders and managers to not just ask once, but
Yeah.
to continue to check in. The last time we had this conversation, this is how I understood things. Is that understanding correct? And if so, has it changed?
Yes. Yeah.
Hmm.
No, it's a really good point. And I do have an example of somebody who used to work for me when I was in a previous role. Um, and she had been hired, actually, she had been appointed into a leadership position, not by me, by my predecessor. So she was new into it and really uncomfortable, and was quite clear, I'll do it for now because the business needs me to do it. It's not what I want long term. I want to go back into a technical role. So for a long time, all our discussions were about getting her into a technical role. And then I kind of identified one for her. And she turned around and went, I know I said that. I've become comfortable. I've actually started to like what I'm doing and I want to keep managing people. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So, I subscribe to the consistency aspect. This is definitely not a one and done. I don't think anybody would think that it is, but I think that needs to be reinforced for people that are taking this conversation seriously. I like the competency model, and you and I were talking before we started recording that I understand people development and I do people development. And with that said, I would say I'm adequate at best.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I don't do is create a competency model and
Yeah.
then try to allow each of, my reports to hit those different locks as they grow.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
And then obviously, if you have something you're shooting for, you have to naturally do a review to see where are we, what have we accomplished, what do we need to continue to work on.
Yeah. Exactly. And then that feeds very much into those development conversations with people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving forward, I think you were starting to talk about mentoring before I
Yeah.
interrupted you. So could you pick that up?
Yeah, no, exactly. So I think that's another key action that we've tried to identified coming out of talent management review. So again, for those people that we want to further develop as leaders or also potentially in a technical area is putting mentoring programs in place to help facilitate that development. Um, and I've seen lots of different mentoring programs and I've been on a number of them myself and also mentoring people. And I do honestly think they're invaluable. I think it gives you a very safe space where you can have a very open conversation with somebody who's not in your line management, who isn't assessing your performance on, where you feel maybe uncomfortable or not confident. And I think it's easier to do that with somebody who's very neutral than with your line manager. I mean, it depends on your line manager, but I think it gives you that space where you can have a very, very open and transparent conversation with somebody. And I think hearing a mentor's experiences and challenges they've had in their career, I think that's just an incredible knowledge to share with somebody. And I think is really, really helpful. And it has been in my career. And I've had different types of mentors. I've had, very, I would say, formal mentors, and some informal, some just people they weren't even called a mentor, but that's essentially what they were. They were people I could go to for advice and just bounce ideas off, or if I was having issues, just somebody to talk to. And I think that's incredibly valuable. And I think where it really helped was when I first moved into people management. Um, I think when you first go in, and even now, I mean, I still make mistakes, I still do the wrong thing, but I think at the start, it's a steep learning curve.
Mm.
And I think having somebody where you can just go to and say, right, I'm struggling to get my point across, or, there could be performance areas that need to be improved. How do you best communicate that? And it's just having, somebody you can talk to is invaluable. And I think for me as well, things like, I think I had one mentor say to me, you really display your emotions when you're talking to people and you're communicating with them. And sometimes, in a situation where you're having to have a difficult conversation with somebody, you need to try to be very maybe more neutral in
Stoic.
your communicating because it's sometimes inflaming the situation.
Mm.
And I hadn't recognized that myself.
Mm.
I hadn't seen it. And it was only when they said it to me and then I started monitoring how I was, I guess, behaving in some of those discussions that I started to really recognize it myself and right, slow down how fast I'm talking, really just be calm, have a very neutral expression, and it's a much better conversation. But when I first went into people management, I didn't understand that.
Mm.
And it was having that mentor really, really helped me to see that and to change it.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Interestingly enough, so we use a note-taking system here at the FDA group.
okay,
We use Fireflies, and it gives you all these analytics, which is really fun.
okay,
And one of the things that I've learned is I need to slow down
yeah,
because I speak 10 more words per minute on average than what is
mhm,
typical.
yeah,
So I also have to slow down.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I definitely do that. And honestly, it's also an Irish thing. We speak very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have to
Yeah.
monitor it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when we think of mentoring, you talked about some are formal, some are informal.
Yeah.
I actually, when I think of mentoring, I think of mentoring like the mentoring I've been in, as I define it, has been more for people that are either in high school or college or very early in their career,
Yeah.
and just giving them the basics
Yeah.
of leadership management, business ethics,
Mm.
and so on and so forth. The way you describe it, it sounds more like an internal thing.
Yes.
And so, I think we could use the word mentoring and coaching kind of synonymously.
Yeah.
Um, Now, how would you define mentoring? Because we've already defined people uh, development.
Yeah.
How would you define mentoring, and what are the core components of that?
Yeah. So I would see mentoring as it's a form of coaching. Um, and I think so one, I think the mentor should be completely independent and not in your line management. I think
Okay.
having um and I think that's because it is important to be able to be very open and honest in what you see your challenges are. And I think that's sometimes difficult with line managers. I think generally I've been very lucky. I have had great line managers throughout my career, and I haven't necessarily had that issue, but I have seen it with other people.
Hmm.
And to be also honest, I have had some mentees that what they need help with is managing upwards.
Hmm.
So that's also part of that. But I would see it's a lot of the mentoring I've been doing and the mentoring programs I've been in is more on developing soft skills
Hmm.
and helping people, um, whether it's in conflict resolution or in communication skills or how to develop a network. It's more in that area. I have done a different form of mentoring in that I'm also, I don't know if in the US this is widely understood, but I'm an EU qualified person.
Yep, we know.
In
Well, I
order
know what that
to,
means. I think a lot
okay,
of the audience understands what that is
okay,
as well. Yeah.
perfect, great. Um, in certainly in the UK where I qualified when we were still in the EU, part of that is you have to have a sponsor who acts as a mentor. So I had one, and that was very technical type of mentoring and a lot of I guess scenario based. You have example a complaint from a patient that their pink capsules that they normally get are blue. What do you do? And kind of working through that logic. And then when I qualified, I've also tried to pay that back in that I helped mentor and sponsor two trainee QPs who are now both qualified as well. So I think that there's different types, and I wouldn't say there's one to me. There isn't one firm definition. Certainly, the last 5, 10 years has been much more focused on leadership. But yeah, to me, sorry if I haven't answered your question very well.
You did. So I'm going to take it a step further. What is
Okay.
the difference between people development and mentoring? And for those people that are listening and saying, yes, I want to develop my people, or yes, I want to be intentional about mentoring, what
Yeah.
are some of the basics that people
Yeah.
need to understand in order to begin that journey effectively?
Yeah. So I think development is acquiring new skills and experiences. So that can be your job shadowing somebody, or you go on a course, or um, you train in a new area, um, or you do a leadership course, you read a book even. Um, but I think mentoring is having a coach or a mentor, whatever you want to call them. It's basically somebody who's there and who you can go to and say, right, I need help in this area. And they will help to coach and mentor you. So I think mentoring is part of development. It's one aspect of it. I, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just came up with an analogy. So
Okay.
the people development is the syllabus, and the mentoring is the tutoring.
Yes.
Okay, very
Yes.
good.
I like that you're really, really good at just taking what I say and summarizing it in a very concise way that makes complete sense.
I'll tell you where to mail the check. Now, just to make things a little bit more challenging, we
Okay.
talked about the difference between, before we started recording, development and advancement.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can we bring that to the forefront of the
Yeah.
conversation?
Sure. Yeah. And I think I touched on this at the start of this discussion as well, on having those discussions with people, and sometimes there's a bit of a misunderstanding between development and advancement. And to me, advancement is promotion, we'll say. It's moving up through the organization. So again, development, acquisition of new skills and experiences, and then advancement is promotion. I think sometimes when I've started having conversations with development conversations with people, they think we're having a conversation about how they get promoted, or I've been doing a great job. When am I getting promoted?
Hmm.
Um,
Sure.
and I think especially maybe people who are earlier in their career don't necessarily understand um, how that works. So I think that's a very key point in those conversations to make sure it's clear. Um, but I think as an organization as well, you have to decide what are the roles that we need in an organization and at what level. So you might be in a role which has a certain scope and responsibilities, and you're excellent at it and you're ready for that next step. But just because you're at that stage doesn't necessarily mean you can be promoted. So what I've always tried to explain
Mm.
to people is, and this again goes back to the competency framework, is there is a role, it has a scope, it has responsibilities, and then there are expectations for that on the skills and behaviors and soft skills that are needed. And it is that it's the position that is graded at, let's say, manager or director, or associate. It's not the person. So it's the position that has the grade. And then you hire somebody who meets the expectations from a skill set, soft and technical, to fit that. And if somebody is ready for the next level, there needs to be a position available for them to move in. You can't, unfortunately, have everybody at director level or VP level.
Right.
And that's a hard message for people to hear sometimes
Mm.
because, if you're doing a good job and you want to progress, it's hard to understand why you're not. So what I've always tried to explain is it's the position that has the grade, not the person. Um, and you can really only change the grade of that position if I would say the scope and the responsibilities of it is expanded or changed, and then you need a different level. Um, and again, it goes back to, I think, the point you made as well. Not everybody is interested in advancement, which, it's their career, they need to own it. That's not to say those people shouldn't be developed. They absolutely should, because again, even though they're in a certain role, that role isn't in today's world, that role isn't going to stay the same. So they still need to be acquiring new skills and expertise. But again, like we still need to keep those people. They are incredibly valuable and honestly are the core of our businesses. And we still need to be keeping all of those people engaged and motivated. Um, so I think having, even if they don't want to progress or advance up the organization, it's still incredibly important and key to have those development conversations with those people and make sure that there are plans in place for them as well. It's not just about your future senior leaders.
Mm. Now, I've been there, a very unusual situation, but when I was in high school, I took martial arts and I had reached the level of promotion, but I
Yeah.
was ahead of my class. And so I was patient for a certain amount of time. And then I said, this is, ridiculous. I'm not going to keep doing this over and over again if they're not willing to promote me. And I ended up
Yeah.
leaving.
Yeah.
So a couple things jump out at me when I think about this, right? Is one, if somebody has achieved a certain uh, advancement
Yeah.
and there isn't a position open,
Yeah.
how do you handle that challenge about them patiently waiting until the point that they can't wait any longer? And I'm not going to let you go that easy. the person responsible for telling them if they've reached that level is you.
Mm.
And if you feel like they're not there and they disagree with you,
Yeah.
how do you handle that obstacle as well?
Yeah. Okay. So I think for the first part where they've reached that level, but you don't have a position, I think that's where your talent management reviews become really important. Because although you might not have a position now, maybe another member of the leadership team that you're on or in another department might have a position coming up that would be a step up for them. It mightn't be the one they necessarily had in mind, but there might be opportunities elsewhere in your organization.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that's where those talent reviews are really important so that you can understand what's coming up in other areas. And you can have conversation with them to say, I don't have anything now, but maybe in this other department there is something coming up. It's maybe something you hadn't considered, but I would also always say to people, be open to other opportunities, and maybe it wasn't on your plan. And that has happened to me as well. Something's cropped up which I wasn't expecting, and think about it. It's a chance.
Well, I think that's really good because in the absence of the person actually deciding to accept that role that might be adjacent to what they wanted,
Yeah,
at least they see that there's a good faith effort to allow
yeah,
that person to advance. And I
yeah,
think even if you're unsuccessful in advancing that person because they're not interested in that adjacent position, that's really up to them. And
yeah.
so they've made that cognitive decision to not accept it. So you've done your job, which I think can translate into an extended length of time where you can retain that
Mm.
employee, hoping that something more in line with what they want opens up. Hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. Um,
Okay, now let's move
the tough
into,
question.
yeah, now I want to move into you've been helping me
Yeah,
develop. You're my boss, and
yeah,
I know what the requirements are for
yeah,
advancement, and you're telling me that I'm not there,
yeah,
and I think that you're wrong. So,
yeah.
how do you handle that?
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's a tough one. And I think you have to try and give examples. So I think it can't just be your opinion. I think you have to try and give some real life examples. So it might be, they're struggling on communication, or, you know, their, their network isn't strong enough. They haven't built up those very robust relationships with stakeholders. So I think one, I would give them real life examples of, where I saw them do something, but the expectation is it should be done in a different way. I would also try to get some 360 feedback. So is it really just me that thinks that, or do their peers and stakeholders have the same view as me, or something in between maybe? So I would also try to get some other opinions to support me, or they may support him. Maybe it's I'm wrong as well. I'm
Mhm.
not always right, but I would one try to use examples, but two try to get some stakeholder feedback. But I would also really try to ensure that I was focusing on all of the positives, the things that they're doing well. I mean, if it's really somebody who's excellent at their job and who really does have that capability, they're just not quite there yet. I would also really try to make that clear, like they're on the right path. They're not far off. There are just some areas that they need to focus on, and really try to make sure that they understand they're getting there and it's not a very negative conversation, and try to keep the motivation there. But try to make it very clear with examples and areas that they need to focus on, and actually something tangible that they can
Yeah,
work on, and not just vague, oh, I don't think you're really there yet, but just, yeah, try to make it a bit more realistic.
yeah, I like that. So, I'm imagining the listeners are saying, okay, mentoring, development, advancement, those are all things that I, as a leader and manager, know that I need to do. I do them.
Mhm.
But similar to, maybe what I said earlier in terms of I feel adequate at best,
Yeah,
this conversation is really, lit the flame of really wanting to be better at that certain aspect of my role.
yeah.
So what type of information and resources can you point people to that will give them additional information that they can utilize in order to improve their
Mm.
efficacy in this space?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a huge amount out there. So I think like
That's
things
part
like
of the problem.
yeah, that's part of the problem. So things like this podcast. I would say also there's lots of books out there. I mean, I have to say I'm definitely more of a book person than a listening to podcast person. Everyone has their own flavors.
Do share.
So books, I would say when I moved into VP position, and that I think for me that was a big change and felt like a big step up. And I think one of the books I read and that I still go back to, it's called Executive Presence,
Okay.
by Sylvia Ann Hewlett, I think. And I found that very useful, especially as a woman in a leadership position. It was, a lot about how you convey, you know, gravitas by focusing on how you act, um, really thinking about how you communicate. And honestly, I haven't got all of this right by any means. You say you're adequate. I think you're probably far more than that. But and I would say I'm not an expert in any of this. I'm still learning every day, and I do make mistakes, and I still go to mentors, and I'm still very open always to getting feedback on things I can do better myself.
Hmm.
But I would say to people, um, there is so much resource out there. Find what works for you, whether it's a podcast or a particular author, TED Talks. There's probably a lot of resource internally as well.
Hmm.
Um, and find a mentor, find more than one mentor,
Hmm.
internal, external, and use your network. Networks are so useful. I
Hmm.
still go back to people I worked 2 years ago to say, look, can we have a chat? I need some advice. Um, so that there's lots of ways. I think
Hmm.
just learn continuously is what I would
Yeah.
say. Yeah,
So a word that keeps popping into my head from the very onset of the podcast is intentionality.
yeah,
And so I think for those people listening that are really interested in improving themselves as it pertains to developing their people, I think that, the first step is just being intentional about, look, this is not something I'm gonna say I want to do and then 6 months later say what happened, right? So I would say creating a plan is
yeah,
probably a good idea. And it doesn't have to be extensive from the beginning, right? It's, pick a book, right? Read that. Pick one podcast, right? The journey of a million miles starts with one step. Pick a podcast to listen to. I think TED Talk is a reasonable recommendation, although I've noticed that the impact of TED Talks has decreased since they first started, just personally speaking. But I think those are a couple of good ideas, and I appreciate you sharing one of the books that's had an impact on you. So hopefully people can go and check that out.
okay.
Um, well, this has been a really good podcast. I like the insight that you've provided. What would you like to leave the audience with?
So I think I would like to leave the audience with, if you are a people leader or a people manager, focus on your people, spend the time, develop them, follow Nicholas' advice, be intentional in how you do it. And I think you will really see the rewards for that, both on a personal level when you see people grow, um, but you will see the engagement, the motivation, the retention, and it's good for your organization for the future.
Yeah. Um, and that's really great. I actually wanted to add something as well. So I've been on this big swing about paradoxes.
Okay.
And if you start to pay attention, you'll actually see how many paradoxes there are.
Okay.
And this is something people have heard before, but in this particular paradox, the more you teach, mentor, develop
Yeah.
someone else, the more you yourself
Oh, completely.
learn, develop, and become better at what you do. So, and one of the other paradoxes that I really find really important to my life is uh, if you focus on your happiness, you will not achieve it. You have to focus on making other people happy, right? And if you focus on other people, the amount of blessings that you receive
Yeah.
without any expectation present themselves. And so there's a whole bunch of reasons that I think this is a worthwhile conversation. So thank you
Fantastic.
very much for your insight. I really appreciate it. And to everybody that's listening, as always, if you find conversations like this valuable, please share it with a colleague or your professional network. If you have not already, subscribe to get updates of new episodes at thefdagroup.com/podcast and follow the FDA Group on LinkedIn. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you all next time.